Are we watching the gradual construction of a parallel financial system?
100%. We're seeing it happen in real time, Michelle. They're building the rails, the vaults, the settlement systems, and the exchanges to do this. This is real and it's growing, and you can see it by the agenda at the new BRICS meeting, what they posted. They're not giving up. They're moving forward with BRICS Pay, like the BRICS Grain Exchange and like the BRICS Metals Exchange. These are all avenues to slowly reduce dependence on the US dollar, which chips away at the dollar settlement status.
What do you expect to come out of this meeting that really now consolidates this is real, this is happening, this is gaining momentum?
You could argue we're pretty close to that moment right now if it were to continue to move because of what's happening to the bond market. You quietly default on the reserve status by letting gold go to the moon. The biggest money in the world is accumulating gold as if they know something. Van Eck Fund says if the dollar really did lose reserve status, we could see gold go to 139,000 an ounce. That's them saying this. The ramifications simply from a viable alternative that is mature and is cooperative is the death knell to the US system. And we'll wake up one day to find a different world.
This is The Real Story with Michelle Makori.
Hello, I'm Michelle Makori. Thank you for joining us here on The Real Story, where we go beyond the headlines, beneath the surface and behind the curtain to show you what is really happening with money, markets, and power. The 18th BRICS Summit is now less than a month away. On September 12th, some of the world's most consequential leaders, including India's Prime Minister Modi, Russia's President Putin, and China's President Xi, are set to gather in New Delhi under India's presidency, along with leaders from Brazil, South Africa, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Ethiopia, and Egypt. Now, India is framing this year's summit around the theme, building for resilience, innovation, cooperation, and sustainability. But beneath the theme is a much bigger story. The agenda is expected to focus on cross-border payments, local currency settlement, financial integration, and expanding economic cooperation across the BRICS bloc. Now, every BRICS summit seems to spark or revive the same debate. Is this finally the beginning of the end for the dollar-dominated financial system? Now, so far, those predictions have been overblown or premature. But this year, the story is not about a common BRICS currency. It's about something arguably more important: building the infrastructure, payment rails, local currency settlement, commodity exchanges, and deeper financial integration. Now, Andy Schectman has argued for years that this is the story investors are missing. Not one dramatic sudden announcement, but the slow, deliberate construction of what he calls a parallel financial architecture. New payment rails, new commodity exchanges, and new settlement mechanisms that give countries alternatives to the traditional dollar-based financial system. Joining me now to discuss the latest updates with BRICS ahead of the meeting and what all of this could mean for the dollar, gold, and the global financial system is Andy Schectman, founder and CEO of Miles Franklin Precious Metals. Andy, always good to chat with you.
Hi, Michelle. Great to see you. Not here next to me this time, but nonetheless, great to see you. And you're right, it is. It's one trade agreement, one payment system, one currency settlement at a time. That is what is happening, but it's also why it's so easy for people to dismiss, because it's not the instantly gratifying, instant information, instantly obvious, the way that people have been accustomed to in this country, instant gratification not being fast enough. And I do think it is happening little by little, for sure.
Little by little, as you always say. And Andy, you have been very early to flag this trend. You have been talking about de-dollarization and de-treasurization for years. And for years, you've argued that de-dollarization is not one event. It is a gradual process, little by little, like you say. And critics have often dismissed BRICS as long on rhetoric, short on execution. But recently, we have seen, and you've pointed to, a series of concrete developments. BRICS Pay continues to move forward as an alternative payment network. Russia has proposed a BRICS Grain Exchange. Discussions continue around a BRICS Precious Metals Exchange. Local currency trade continues to expand away from the dollar. A new settlement infrastructure is being built outside the traditional Western financial system. So I do want to get into those components in detail and bring it in to your thesis, what they mean. But before we do that, let's focus on the big picture here, because taken individually, none of these developments really change the world overnight. But taken together, talk us through how your thesis seems to be validated here. Are we watching the gradual construction of a parallel financial system? Talk us through that.
100%. I mean, we're seeing it happen in real time, Michelle. I mean, we're seeing the rails. We have mBridge, which is the cross-border payment system. It's operational. It was developed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, United Arab Emirates, and late to the party, Saudi Arabia. So you have some very substantial names there, some very big names, of course, Saudi Arabia and UAE, along with China being the three biggies, but well, Hong Kong too, especially now Hong Kong. But that's central bank to central bank. You have things like the cross-interbank payment system, CIPS. We've talked about how they've signed up a good swath of countries, in particular those in Southeast Asia under the acronym of ASEAN. 800 million people, twice the population of the United States, China's largest trading partner by far, have the ability to trade outside of the purview of the Western SWIFT system, settling imbalances in something other than treasuries, perhaps. And that's what we're seeing with the expansion of metals vaults. When metal leaves China, it has to come, gold leaves China, has to come out of Hong Kong by law. So seeing a new system, a new exchange in Hong Kong is massive. It's massive on a few different levels. Number one, it's instant settlement primarily. And number two, it is in yuan. In other words, for the first time in 140 years, the age of the LBMA and COMEX is 50 plus years old, but these have always been Western systems. And now you have an exchange with instant settlement. That is the big deal. Settlement in another currency other than US dollars. And when we look at the thrust in some of these new vaults that we're seeing in Singapore and the United Arab Emirates, instant settlement in dollars, but instant settlement nonetheless, challenging very slowly the Western system of rehypothecation, selling the same asset over and over and over again, setting the prices, much like the tail wagging the dog, where in 2020 we saw oil go to negative $40 a barrel. So we're beginning to see the infrastructure, whether it be the payment rails, think of those as the veins of the system. Think of the exchanges that are popping up, Singapore, Dubai, Mumbai, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Hong Kong, Brazil, all of these new exchanges, and let's not forget Shanghai, represent the arteries. And so when you look at something like the cross-interbank payment system, or when you look at something like mBridge, this is the rails of the new BRICS system, whether it is being sold to us as the internationalization of the yuan or not. To me, and to the point of not antagonizing President Trump, that's exactly what this is. And it will allow countries to trade with one another fluently over their own system, using their own local currencies and settling imbalances in gold. But the big development, of course, is how China has opened up a parallel settlement system in another currency. So China can trade with the United Arab Emirates and buy their oil, pay for it in digital yuan, which can be immediately converted into gold right now, coming out of Hong Kong. And the expansion of all of these vaults through the Belt Road Initiative in all of these countries will allow, in essence, the ability to trade your currencies and settle any imbalances with any of your trading partners in gold, with the ability to take possession of it very quickly right now out of Hong Kong and soon out of all of these vaults. And I think it is, to your point, a system of ones, you got payment systems, you got vaults, you got settlement systems, again, here in other currencies, and you have the ability to very, very methodically build an infrastructure that will be very hard to challenge once it is fully mature. But you can see, indeed, it is becoming very mature. And you said one other thing too, Michelle. You said BRICS Pay, which, if you listen to some interviews by the developer, last year he was trying to get it integrated and said meetings had begun within the Belt Road. This is B2B, business to business, B2C, business to customer, and also bank to bank, but not central bank. It's more on the retail level. And the whole thrust of it is to allow people to instantly use a an app or a credit card kind of thing to purchase whatever it is they want to purchase within any of the BRICS countries, just like that. That's a massive deal. And that's, again, without the SWIFT interference. So you're looking at a central bank to central bank level. You're looking at a consumer to business level, a business to business, a business to bank. These are all avenues to slowly reduce dependence on the US dollar, which chips away at the dollar settlement status. And to your point, which you highlighted very articulately, if you don't own as many dollars, you don't need as many treasuries. And we see that by the de-treasurization, if it were a word, and the accumulation of gold, but largely by the countries in the global south who are, I believe, looking at things, playing the long game, looking at this as a new system emerging, not to replace the dollar, but to challenge it. And I don't think that any of the countries within the BRICS want to be the world reserve currency because of Triffin's dilemma. Their exports, their manufacturing gets decimated. But how about a system that challenges it so that they can do things on their own? Everyone take care of their own currency and their own monetary system, but use gold as the barometer by which to measure the health of all these currencies. And so we'll settle imbalances, whether it be your currency falls out of favor or you have trade imbalances. Give me the gold right now, instead of being reliant specifically upon one settlement system, which seems to be less than authentic, and one currency, which has fiscal and monetary irresponsibility problems plaguing it, let alone our policies, with around the globe that are becoming scrutinized and are less than trusted. So yeah, I think this is real and it's growing, and you can see it by the agenda at the new BRICS meeting, what they posted. They're not giving up on moving forward at all.
In fact, very interesting attendance at the summit, which is happening, as we say, September 12th and 13th. India is hosting it. The theme is building for resilience, innovation, cooperation, and sustainability. So Russia's President Putin, he's confirmed that he's attending. Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to be there as well. Now, Beijing has not yet officially confirmed that he will personally be there, but if he does show up, it would be his first visit to India since 2019. And that would carry additional significance given the gradual thaw in India-China relations. So that would be a pretty big deal if he shows up to China himself. President de Silva of Brazil, one of the founding BRICS leaders, he's going to be there. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to be there. And we're also going to see leaders from some of the new BRICS members, like Egypt, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and potentially even Iran, which is interesting given where we are in the state of the world with Iran and some of these other countries, including their neighbors these days. But it's very interesting to see who actually shows up to this meeting. Several partner countries, including Bangladesh, have been invited. It's all part of a broader outreach here. And it's really being presented as a potentially important moment for the bloc's financial integration. But, Andy, we've said this before, right? You and I have had conversations about these BRICS summits before, and the narrative has always been, oh, it's at this meeting that something significant and major is going to be announced. And there was talk about the BRICS currency, the unit, at previous summits. That seems to have kind of fallen away. You can give us an update on that. That was a currency comprised of a basket of currencies from the countries that are members, as well as 40% gold. BRICS unit hasn't really come to fruition. We are hearing about these little steps here and there, but what do you expect to come out of this meeting that really now consolidates this is real, this is happening, this is gaining momentum?
Well, that's just it. First of all, we could point to the meeting in Russia where all but espionage by the BIS pulling out of mBridge at the 12th hour, in my mind, to embarrass the entire platform, didn't dissuade the Chinese and the members who are involved in this to continue to forge forward. And I think the problem that we face in a lot of analytics these days, macro analytics, is pointing to a moment or a date. And this is what the Chinese and all of these countries seem to be very, very adept at, very good at, and that is to do things in a manner, creating these parallel systems in a manner that will slowly and ultimately rely less upon the U.S. dollar. It is not to eliminate the U.S. dollar. It is not to create a moment that not only shocks the world, but it doesn't do China or any of these countries any good. It would hurt their own balance sheet. And I think that the point is that as they continue to formulate trade agreements and payment systems and currency settlements, they're laying the tracks for a multipolar system. When we talk about mBridge, it is operational. They have not brought out the unit because I think Trump would freak out. But what have they done instead? Well, they've set up, what is the unit? The unit is 60% BRICS plus currencies, 40% gold, redeemable by any of the central banks upon demand. It's a central bank to central bank platform. What has China done instead? Well, they've set up the payment rails. mBridge is working, CIPS is working, and they've set up the vaulting system, and they're continuing to build more through the Belt Road. But the vault in Hong Kong that allows not only for settlement in yuan, but instant settlement, cash and carry, if you will, is really pretty much kind of the same thing, but it's just being framed as the internationalization of the yuan. It's the BRICS rails is what it is, and it's not to piss off Trump. Let's just call it what it is. But the infrastructure that is very quietly and very methodically being put into place does at some point become very difficult to reverse. And so, yes, we haven't heard, but you're seeing them continue to move forward, like BRICS Pay. They're moving forward with BRICS Pay, like the BRICS Grain Exchange. They're moving forward with the BRICS Grain Exchange. And like the BRICS Metals Exchange, they are now moving forward with the BRICS Metals Exchange. But, we've had this discussion, you and I, before when we were talking about the BIS and what they did at the last moment, which to me was right out of a James Bond movie by pulling the plug on them at the 12th hour, embarrassing them. And I think it wouldn't be to anyone's benefit in these countries to be very, very candid about it. Like, for example, we just saw that China, in its latest move, is working directly with Africa's largest bank to settle trade directly in yuan. Now, we already know that China is Africa's largest trading partner. And, is that the BRICS? Because, South Africa is certainly a charter member of BRICS, right? They're the S in BRICS. And now if you can deal directly with the yuan, how hard would it be for them to say, okay, bang, now it's the BRICS currency. The rails are built. The settlement system is built. You want to sell us your stuff, we'll pay for it in yuan. And if you want gold for it, go for it. That's what they're doing. So how hard would it be just to switch train cars on the same train rails? It's not. Mm-hmm. So I think that is what is happening, and it's less a declaration of openness with the BRICS endeavors that proved to be fruitless and silly. Instead, what it is China taking the lead and saying this is all about us. But in my mind, it's all about building rails that can be quickly adapted to the BRICS system.
And not incurring too much wrath in the process, to your point earlier.
Totally.
And BRICS Pay is one of the dominant topics at this year's meeting. And it's interesting, Andy, because when you read the BRICS Pay website, they're not leading with the words payments or technology. They're actually leading with words which I thought were very interesting, like financial freedom without borders, payment freedom without dictatorship, freedom of choice, freedom from monopolies. Now, to me, that is a very deliberate choice of language here, because they're effectively saying the existing financial system is not that. It isn't just dominant, it's restrictive. And you've argued again for years that we're watching the construction of a parallel financial architecture. And it seems, to your points that you've made in other interviews, is that BRICS is also trying to impose different narratives and ideas. Is BRICS trying to win the battle of ideas as well as U.S. dominance, not just dollar dominance, is being challenged?
Absolutely. I mean, they're everything about the BRICS is in a cooperative manner. It is the carrot, not the stick. When was the last time you saw China in a war? Their Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which now Iran is part of, is also the largest regional financial and military organization on the planet. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization and even the Belt Road Initiative. It's not perfect, and you could find flaws in any plan, but what are they doing? China goes and industrializes underdeveloped countries, allows them to unlock the value of all of their natural resources, build infrastructure to create a vibrant economy, and to bring those commodities and natural resources to the market. What does China get out of it? A piece of the action. What do the countries get? Industrialization in a cooperative manner. We're not going there and like we did in Venezuela or like we did in any parts of the world where the US or any of the Western influences come in and do things by force. That's not how this goes with them. And I think that is what they're trying to win. And by saying you don't hear them saying we're here to eliminate the dollar, but we're here to provide choices, freedom. Otherwise you're beholden to a handful of very large companies like Visa or MasterCard or very large banks or the US dollar and the Federal Reserve. Now these countries have options. And I think that is exactly what they're trying to say is that, hey, we can do this in a friendly, cooperative manner where we both benefit, right? You get what you need, we get what we need, and together we grow stronger. And it's happening. And I think people ignore and dismiss it because it takes so long, Michelle. You and I had our first discussion on this, I don't know, 6 years ago.
2021.
2025, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and it takes a long time, but you can see it's becoming more
2022.
and more.
I take that back. 2022.
Well, it's becoming more and more legitimate. But look, there's a lot of things like the Trump administration that pops up that slows the narrative or doesn't derail it, but certainly can put a hidden variable or an extra twist and a turn.
And we'll get into we'll get into the U.S. Reaction. I want to get a little bit into the details here, because BRICS Pay, often used as it refers to one single payment system, but as you just highlighted, it actually describes 3 separate layers that are still at different stages of development. So the first is a retail QR code application designed for consumers that is advertised as for your freedom to pay whenever, wherever, however, with the money methods that feel natural to you, not imposed on you. There's that language again. Use the cards and accounts you already have to pay in any BRICS Plus country. Now, the second would connect existing domestic payment networks, such as India's UPI and Brazil's PIX, allowing them to communicate across borders. And the third and most ambitious is that wholesale settlement system that could eventually use central bank digital currencies to facilitate direct transactions between BRICS nations. Now, when all of these 3 elements are fully operational and fully launched, what do you expect the consequences to be here? Because it seems like they're attacking SWIFT, challenging SWIFT, MasterCard, Visa. Again, these are still under development. When these are fully a go, what happens?
Well, I mean, I don't know that anyone can answer that question in a vacuum. What happens to the economy alongside with it? What happens to interest rates as there's less demand for U.S. Treasuries? And what happens?
But do you expect it to suck those transactions from those other systems immediately, or what? How do you see that playing out?
No, I don't know about immediately, but what it does is every single piece of the track that they put into place, the continued financial integration, just starts to challenge the system. I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, when you had cassette tapes come out, after 8-track tapes came out. Well, the 8 tracks didn't die overnight, but it certainly aided to their demise. And maybe that's a bad analogy. Demise isn't really what I'm getting at here. It's alternatives. What does that mean to the system? What it probably means is much higher inflation, much higher interest rates here in the West, much less demand for our dollar and for our Treasury. What does that mean in a system as over-leveraged as it is? And sure, it could happen once it's fully implemented. It could be quick, but it's less about what the Western countries will do, and more so, when you look at the Belt Road Initiative as it is, it represents 75% of human population and 50% of global GDP before industrialization. So when you add that together, along with the countries in the BRICS, you know, like we've often said, you're dealing with 3 of the 4 largest nuclear arsenals. You're dealing with the majority of the manufacturing capacity in the world, the majority of the rare earth production and refining, the majority of the natural resource production and demand, it seems, and now settlement systems that will price it in local currencies or in the yuan, for one, payment rails, and all of these things together, as they become more refined, I mean, they have to have an impact. No one could tell you, will it be, you know, gradual, then suddenly, or little by little, then all at once? Maybe. But I think it will have a profound effect. And ultimately, the question to be asked will, what will fill the vacuum for the dollar and for the Treasury and for the Western system that we've all become accustomed to? It will definitely affect it. And over time, probably much more. But you get to a group when you have, if full integration, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, India, Russia, China, South Africa, and the list goes on and on and on. It's not like military even becomes an option. And so what is your option? And in a system that is largely based on trust, when we do everything we can, it seems to, whether it be through foreign policy or fiscal irresponsibility and brain-dead monetary policy, to further incentivize said countries to find a backdoor, a alternative to a system that really hasn't focused on fairness and equality, but more so on keeping the Western system alive and setting its own rules. So, you know, I think normalcy and recency bias prevails, but I look at it as something that is becoming very substantial, one system at a time, one currency at a time, one settlement system at a time, and we'll wake up one day to find a different world. Don't know what it looks like, but I'm sure it's going to have a profound impact over time.
You know, so to your point, we've got mBridge, CIPS, and BRICS Pay, just different pieces of the same puzzle, different components of the railway here that's being developed. CIPS, China's cross-border payment system for banks; mBridge, central bank digital settlement infrastructure; BRICS Pay, consumer and commercial payment network designed to settle directly in local currencies. Where does gold fit in here? How does gold become the trust layer underneath the system?
Because no one trusts treasuries any longer, and that's the truth of it. And you can see that. I know it's only been a couple of days, but recently we've seen the 30-year Treasury go up and the dollar go down. Now, normally they're supposed to move together. I mean, you would think that the Western, the U.S. dollar, the global reserve currency, the epicenter of trust, right? If interest rates go up for whatever reason, usually a strong economy, you're going to see interest rates start to go higher, get fear of inflation or whatever it may be. But as interest rates go higher in the dollar, it usually would be more demand for return. And so people would flood into the dollar. The dollar should go up. We're seeing interest rates go up and the dollar go down. That's an ominous sign. Now, 2 days does not make a trend, but if you continue to see the dollar go down and rates go up, that is further proof that the world is tired of holding U.S. treasuries, not only because of the fiscal and monetary hurdles that we have to overcome, which seem insurmountable, maybe are mathematically, but also the lack of trust in our foreign policy and in what happens if you end up on the wrong side. Like, maybe this is why India and Saudi Arabia are straddling, if you will, and you know, very much so. Saudi Arabia, differently than India as a charter member of BRICS, India, but they both seem to straddle both sides of the fence, placating to the West while still being heavily involved in the BRICS. You look at Saudi Arabia, who hasn't made a formal decision yet, is a charter member of mBridge, which would be one of the catalysts to hurting the dollar more than anything. And so I think that it's becoming very real. It's just a matter of how does this all play out? I don't think anybody knows, but I think it's something that is becoming very difficult for the West to do much about. And I guess we'll have to see how many new countries are admitted into the system or into the new BRICS platform. But yeah, no, I think everything that they are doing, from payment rails to precious metals, where, you know, it is a system that It's an asset that requires no counterparty fulfillment. It's an asset that has value independent of any counterparty, no counterparty risk if it's held in your own possession. And we're seeing that. We're seeing the central banks buy more gold than at any time ever, year over year over year, 1,000 tons plus 3 years in a row. The central bank said that they bought 16 tons the first quarter, and the World Gold Council said you're lying by a factor of 15. Now, you've actually bought 15 times more than you said. Why are you lying? And the same thing, Goldman Sachs said the same thing about China. I think it was 4.5 times understated or whatever the number is. But the central banks are reporting voluntarily, and they're underreporting purposely. And if you watch, you can see the massive purchasing by the central banks that isn't stopping. And here again, massive second quarter purchases by the central bank, huge second quarter purchases by the central banks, if we believe them that the numbers are what they say. But remember, all of this purchasing we've seen this year, Michelle, has happened as the price has gotten clubbed. And so what do they know about where this is ultimately going when they continue to purchase hand over fist at a time when the price has done anything but go up in dollars? Certainly it's gone up in Japanese yen, but they're buying it, and they're buying it at a level that is unlike anything anyone's ever seen, and they're doing it and not being honest about it, as we have found out. So far this quarter, the second quarter, we've already seen a 407% increase quarter over quarter, or 231 tons. So year to date, they bought 345 tons, and that they've claimed. And Poland has bought 82 tons. And that's the same Poland, by the way, where they asked Adam Glapinski, I've said this before, why is Poland buying so much gold? Because we buy gold, and the Central Bank of Poland buys gold because when someone pulls the power to the global financial system, one that is dominated by electronic accounting records, we want to be able to be prepared for even the most unlikely circumstances. Now, something to that extent, you have the head of the Polish Central Bank buying more than anyone, including China, for 3 years in a row, and they say they're buying it for other reasons than most would think, because when someone pulls the power on the system. By the way, Adam Glapinski also has gone on record recently and said that these pullbacks that we've seen so far this year has been nothing but an opportunity for Poland to add more gold to the reserves, as we can see it at 82 tons that we know for sure have been purchased this year. So the biggest money in the world is accumulating gold as if they know something. And who's doing it here at home? And that's the thing that, I get some flack sometimes, Michelle. People say, well, it's not leaving. Some leaves COMEX, some doesn't. Is it just the central banks playing, or the commercial banks playing games? My answer to that is no, because they never did this before. They never, ever stood for delivery. Less than 1% of contracts did. They would cash settle, they would exit the trade, or they would roll forward. Now they want numbered bars in their account. And my question is, much like Tether buying a huge amount of gold so far this year, continuing, in fact, Tether's bought more gold than anyone but Poland for the last 2 years. Who's doing it? And could it be the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the cent who understands gold? Could he be the one saying to the banks, we want to stay at arm's length, we don't want our footprints in the snow, but you're going to buy a ton of gold for us, you're going to put it into the COMEX and leave it in your house account, we'll get it when we want it. We don't have to worry about any shenanigans on the COMEX. We're the U.S. Treasury. And if we pull it all out, well, they'll be able to follow the footsteps. Let's leave it there. And it makes the analysts in this industry say, well, couldn't it just be the banks playing a game? No, it's not, because they do the game with paper and warrants, not with physical delivery. And I think the same thing should be asked about Tether. We can talk about that if you want, but the bottom line is that gold is being rewoven into the monetary system quietly here and far more overtly across the globe.
Right, and I will get into Tether and the potential U.S. connection there. But to your point, we are seeing central banks buying gold at record levels. Interestingly enough, Poland, who's not part of the BRICS, a big proponent of gold purchasing and not even necessarily linked to this alternative railway that's being built. But it's pointing to that broader trend of de-treasurization and accumulation of gold. And, one of the pillars in your thesis here, as this multipolar financial infrastructure gets built, is the architecture, the plumbing. But, you touched on this, and that's the exchanges and price discovery, because another pillar of your thesis, which I find very interesting, is what is the real price of things, price discovery. And I think that that is a point that often gets overlooked here, Andy, because a lot of the discussion focuses on payment systems and local currency settlements, but we're also seeing efforts to build entirely new marketplaces here. We've got the BRICS agricultural ministers reaffirming plans for the BRICS Grain Exchange. Russia is saying that that project has now entered its design phase. And officials have also discussed a BRICS precious metals exchange, all while Hong Kong is continuing to expand its yuan-denominated gold pricing and emphasis on physical. So is the objective here, Andy, to create alternative centers of price discovery? And explain why that is so important, because if you control where commodities are priced and how they're priced, how much influence does it actually give you over the global financial system? Explain that to us.
Yeah, why do you think the West has guarded that right and that privilege for so many years? Yeah, of course it does. And if you are hell-bent on doing that, the first thing you do is play the game against the West and stand for delivery, quietly, methodically play the long game and just wait everybody out. And they are doing that. We know that China produces more gold than anyone in the world, second most producer of silver. We've highlighted how they fly all around the world buying doré and concentrate, using the Western price, paying twice what the West will, and bringing it back and refining it from Peru and from Mexico. We see the deals they've struck all around the world for, gold mines and infrastructure within the Belt Road, building up the ability to withdraw these natural commodities and take possession of it. If that was your intention and you stand for delivery in a way that you're being caught at least 2 or 3 times by entities like the IMF or the World Gold Council, or recently by Goldman Sachs, looking at the import-export numbers, recognizing it's a voluntary admission to report it, but having it accumulated by People's Liberation Army and proxy banks and standing for delivery, playing the Western game. You guys are stupid enough to suppress the price. We'll play your game, and in fact, we'll incentivize you to do it by having a year-long 10 to 15% premium on Western silver. In other words, we'll pay you 10, 12, 15% more to buy your silver. You just ship it to us, and you'll make a gazillion dollars. Same thing with gold, $85, $90, $100 premium on gold. So ship it. Now, arbitrage doesn't last long. Normally, the traders fill that gap quickly. Keeps lasting. They're playing the long game. And so you play against the Western foolishness of, as Rick Rule says, they're trading 200 times more silver than is deliverable every day on COMEX. Well, at some point, someone says, I don't want paper anymore. But if your intention, people say, why don't they just buy it all? Because if they did that, the markets would cease and they'd get nothing, squadouche. Instead, they play the long game. And people in this country cannot allow their minds to play the long game. So they look at it as dismissive. But China sure can, and so can the other countries within the BRICS framework. So they are using the Western price against us. At the same time they're accumulating, they're building the rails, the vaults, the settlement systems, and the exchanges to do this. The big one being the exchanges that are same-day settlement in another currency. We see the others in Singapore and United Arab Emirates that are same-day settlement in dollars. Same-day settlement is big enough. You put it in another currency and you very well are beginning to change the narrative. And then you look at China's playing the long game. They bought the LME, the London Metals Exchange, the base metals. They build warehouses in China to house these metals. They're playing the long game, using the suppression of Western paper prices to create an environment, the West has, of supporting the strength, illusionary strength of a bond market and of a currency that wouldn't otherwise be so strong. And we can see that by the manipulations that we see with the Western bond market and the Japanese bond market, whereby if price settlement were to really be allowed to happen through buying and selling, not suppression and loaning to the repo market and all of these things that we see, the shenanigans we see right now, then price discovery would be far different. Interest rates would be far higher, and our indebtedness would create a much bigger problem, and things would accelerate. They're playing a long game, and they at some point will be able, I think, through the majority of not only the world's commodities, but also the infrastructure that prices things appropriately, to provide that really, really substantive and very for real alternative. Doesn't mean it's going to kill the dollar, but what it does mean is it's going to change the way that everything works, and it's going to change the lifestyle of the people in this country. That's for sure.
And we'll get to the consequences there. And you focused a lot on the metals exchanges, something that we've discussed at length, and how there's been a migration from the West to the East in terms of potentially setting physical delivery and the price discovery that comes with that. And we focus a lot on the metals exchanges. But I think one of the interesting developments ahead of the BRICS summit is this proposed BRICS Grain Exchange, because this isn't a small regional initiative. The expanded BRICS bloc produces roughly 44% of the world's grain and accounts for about 1 in every 4 grain exports globally. So the goal here isn't simply to create another place to buy and sell grain, it's to build an independent system for commodity pricing, trading settlement, and supply chain coordination, again, outside Western exchanges like the Chicago Board of Trade. And they've indicated that this platform could eventually expand beyond grain to include fertilizers and other agricultural commodities. So it's to establish yet another alternative system for pricing, settlement, and trade outside those traditional Western exchanges. So if we have a block of countries, Andy, representing nearly half of the world's grain production, beginning to establish its own benchmark prices, settling trade in local currencies, what impact does that have on the dollar? Because if countries increasingly settle trade outside the dollar, they no longer need to accumulate as many dollar reserves. And if they don't need as many dollar reserves, they don't need to recycle those reserves into US Treasuries. They're buying gold as that neutral reserve asset, as we've discussed. What does this mean if we do have these alternative exchanges that set prices not in dollars? What does that mean for the bigger de-dollarization trend?
You just answered it with your own question, Michelle. And as usual, you're spot on. And, I mean, what you're getting is transparency and pricing and competition and price discovery. And, one of Putin's aides who is behind this said, like you said, we produce as much and consume as much grain as everyone else does in the West, yet we have no ability to control the price. That's going to change, he said, with the implementation of the BRICS Grain Exchange. Well, it would happen with all of these systems. What has made the dollar so extraordinary is that in order to buy commodities, you need dollars. Well, and that's created a big demand for US dollars. And if you have lots of dollars, you're silly not to invest the excess dollars into treasuries and earn a yield that are very, very liquid rather than leaving them in a bank earning next to nothing. So that's why everyone would recycle the excess dollars into treasuries. It's given us low interest rates in this country, by and large, for a long time. It's made the assets that we own price much higher, and one could argue artificially higher. And it's also made the goods that we buy at Walmart and Target really cheap. You start to reduce dependence on the Western exchanges and increase settlement in local currencies and gradually build these parallel systems that go alongside the dollar. Yeah, this is big. And now you take away the power of the CME group or Colmex who prices all of this stuff, and doesn't matter what commodity it is. The world is creating parallel systems that rely less on these institutions of the West, ultimately less on the dollar. And if you have less dollars, that means less treasuries, that means higher interest rates. And this whole thing has consequences down the line of varying magnitude. But yeah, when it's fully implemented, it's a very big deal. And when you look at the West, when you look at the UK, when you look at France, when you look at the United States, you wonder, how the hell can we pull out of this nosedive? How can we? Because we're not the same as we once were, not only from demographics, but also in the United States from unity, from an education standpoint, from an indebtedness standpoint. Everything seems to be pointing to a nosedive. I had Bill Holter on my show the other day, and I asked him, I said, if the central bank started doing everything tomorrow perfectly, can we pull out of this nosedive? His answer was no. He says it's just mathematics. Now, I'd like to hope that he's wrong, but the point of it is we are reaching quickly that point of no return with our fiscal and our monetary policy and the lack of being able to normalize our balance sheet or show any austerity concerns whatsoever. So yeah, I think that this is very logical, and I think that with every day that passes and every new exchange and every new payment system and then price setting commodities to the majority of human population, once this is all put together, it becomes pretty real.
So let's talk about that, what this picture could look like, because you're saying the story is not that the dollar suddenly disappears, but that every new payment rail, every commodity exchange, every settlement mechanism makes the existing dollar treasury system just a little less indispensable, right? So at what point does that become economically meaningful to the average American? What does that look like?
I mean, you could argue we're pretty close to that moment right now if it were to continue to move because of what's happening to the bond market. You know, the bond, you have rates moving up, which to me is about trust and confidence. It's not about inflation. And I think that's really a problem where the United States is very reliant upon foreign investment into our treasury market. It has supported our lifestyle. And as less and less countries are holding our treasuries, it's less about the dollar and more so about the treasury. Who finances our continued indebtedness? And you look at 15 trillion that is owed in the next 12 months in bonds that are coming due, let alone the 2 or 3 plus trillion we'll have in a deficit that continues to grow as interest rates grow higher. And this country has already passed the Ferguson line, which says as a superpower, if you pay more for interest on your debt than you do for military, you will cease being a superpower at some point. So you could argue that one of these days that you're going to see problems that push things over. Now you take a look at the private equity market, and you take a look at the FDIC coming out and saying we're very concerned about the banks that are exposed to the private equity market. Let's set aside for a moment that the CEOs of the private credit division of BlackRock and Blackstone, those two monster entities in the private, hyperscale private credit market, are the ones that had experienced gating and redemptions and gating. They just resigned last week. Could that be, do they know something that we don't? So when you talk about rates going higher, when you talk about less demand for treasuries, when you talk about, inflation problems, and look at a Federal Reserve who's in the corner of the room standing on one leg and the paintbrushes are getting closer on both sides, what do? If we try to lower rates, well, we just pour a kerosene can on top of inflation that is already much higher than we're led to believe. It's closer to 4% than it is to 2%. Yet Worf says he still wants his 2% mandate. Well, how do you get there? And if you pour more inflation onto this fire, then you get the Cantillon effect, where the rich get richer because they buy assets that go up, and the poor get poor because putting food on the table and driving to and from work and paying insurance and your tuition becomes almost impossible. And so if you don't go the other way and you raise rates, well, not only does your indebtedness crush you, but we saw what happened to the banks. That's the Klaus Schwab moment. When rates go too high, the indebtedness kills us because no one knows what real price discovery is in any of these assets in an environment of massive interest rate distortion for years and years, and created distortions in the real estate market, in the stock market, in corporate market, in debt, all of this stuff. And who's tied to it all? The banks, the insurance companies, the pension funds. It's quagmire. Forget about real estate, that too. So what do? So when you talk about when will it have effect, every single system that comes into effect that pulls demand away from the dollar and the treasury means it has to be made up somewhere. And who's going to make it up? Maybe the lender of last resort, the Federal Reserve. That means they print money to buy assets, to lower rates, or to continue to create an illusion that ultimately doesn't fix the problem, that ultimately only makes it worse. So yeah, I think, pointing to that moment is impossible, but to say it's kind of like a teeter-totter. You got two people on every side, and then you just keep putting books on one side of the teeter-totter. At some point, the sides swing. Don't know when that is, but you can see that it has a high probability of continuing to happen, piling on the other side, just little by little until that moment. Don't know. It's hard. It's hard to point to what it looks like and when it will happen, but it's easy to see the pieces that are happening. And if we've learned anything over the last few years, it's that nothing plays out the way we think. Everything is a surprise these days. And just be prepared for it. Just know that, these desperate times probably ultimately become very desperate, probably breed these other scenarios that none of us even see coming, but you can sense the trouble if you're paying attention.
Well, let me push back a little on the
It
broad
wouldn't be
picture
an
here.
interview with you if you didn't.
Look, the dollar still accounts for the majority of global reserves. Increasing use of dollar is increasing as well at the same time that central banks are buying more gold, right? SWIFT still dominates international payments. The US Treasury market still remains the deepest and most liquid in the world. There is still the understanding that the US economy is the most innovative and the most transparent. Now, granted, it has its issues, but when you compare it to other countries and other economies in the world. And then in terms of creating new treasury demand, that's where stablecoins, which you and I have discussed, and the Genius Act come in. Stablecoins being those units that allow people to operate in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, and they're backed by US Treasuries and creating a whole new demand for that. I mean, what makes you think that the US is not going to counter this in some meaningful way, that this isn't already enough of a counter? What is the evidence that you see this as becoming a meaningful challenge rather than simply existing alongside the current system, but not really actually taking such a chunk out of the system that we currently have?
Because I think they want a weak dollar. I think they want a soft default on the reserve status. I really do. And you say the dollar use is increasing. Well, that's what would happen in de-dollarization. You spend your dollars. Spend it to buy assets, buy gold, buy land, buy natural resources, whatever it is, spend your dollars. And also you have a lot of debt that people need dollars. Obviously, countries need dollars in order to pay down that debt and to buy oil and all that kind of stuff. But in a de-dollarization framework, you would expect to see the use of dollars at the end or closer to the end going up. It's logical, right? If you have dollar assets and dollars, yeah, you're going to spend them for the assets that you want. So that's one piece. As far as it has the best rails, of course it does, but you can see rails are being built to challenge it slowly. That most in the West wouldn't know if the story fell out of the sky and hit them in the head, right? Like, what's mBridge? What's CIPS? What? You ever heard it on Fox or CBS? Nothing. No, no one knows about it. The West is ignorant because of our media. We don't know what the hell is going on, but I guarantee you they understand it at the Federal Reserve. I guarantee you they understand it at the Treasury, and it is happening. And I do believe they want a weaker dollar. There is no way to reindustrialize this country and bring back manufacturing unless we default on the reserve status. My mentor, God rest his soul, Richard Russell, said flat out, Andy, we consume far more than we produce. So we'll never pay down our debt in that scenario, right? We consume more than we produce. Okay, so you spend more than you make each month, you're going to have a problem. Well, that's what we do. And we're borrowing just to keep the lights on and to pay the interest on the debt. But sooner or later, you run out of credit card companies that want to lend you money. When we talk about the Genius Act and demand for the Treasury, it's synthetic demand to the nth degree. The backing of the Genius Act says that any time money moves in US dollars globally from January forward, it will be stablecoin, instant settlement on blockchain backed by stablecoin, primarily backed by 90-day or less short-term treasuries. Synthetic demand, which, by the way, neuters the dual mandate of the Fed. Right? Warsh already said he wants to get rid of the full employment mandate, but the stable pricing with interest rates, if money moves everywhere is backed by short-term treasuries, you're pinning the front end of the curve to the ground. Not like the overnight lending rate can be higher than the 90-day treasury, or nobody will lend, and the banks will just give it back to the treasury or to the Fed that will earn higher interest than they can on the front end of the curve. So with safety, so you're killing the dual mandate of the Fed, which some say that's Trump is out to do that. Number two, you're pasting the front end of the curve to the ground, which would stimulate business activity. And number three, yes, it gives people the ability to use it around the globe much quicker, excuse me. But remember what we're seeing with companies like Tether. What is being done with the interest that is not transferable? Now, this is where I get into conspiracy theory, I guess you could say. It's my own feeling. They were in trouble, the Tether was, with the Justice Department. What happened to that? Why is that gone? And they own more gold than anyone, but the central banks bought more than anyone but Poland for the last few years. Why is that? Why is no one talking about that? And Bo Hines, the CEO of the Genius Act compliant division of Tether, well, he was Trump's crypto czar through last August. Now, the rules that he helped make, he's benefiting from. They're buying all of this gold. What if, just what if? You know, we saw what they did with the Iranians. They said, hey, you guys, here's 4 wallets tied to, you guys being the Justice Department, tied to the IRGC. And Bessent got up on stage and said, ha, 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 the Iranians don't even know that their money's dead and gone. They haven't even figured it out yet because we disabled the stablecoins at the smart contract level. So not only did Tether open up the back end to the Justice Department, we're partners now. You got Bo Hines in there and they're buying all this gold. Why? We've talked about Triffin's dilemma, which says that, you know, you'll always have a trade imbalance if you're the reserve status. Richard Russell said, inflate or die, or produce more than you consume. Well, we consume more than we produce. How do we reindustrialize if Triffin's dilemma says we can't? How about we soft default on the dollar, a la Jared Bernstein, a la Vice President Vance? They've talked about this. We can't be the reserve currency anymore. Jared says dethrone King Dollar. He was a knucklehead, but he did write that report. We can't be. So how do you do it? If you look at the dollar index or any currency in the globe, they have to sell currencies to buy dollars, their currency to buy oil, and to transact global business, commodities. So over time, their currencies become worth less than ours. This is why manufacturing goes that way to make 10x what you normally would. Instead of making it here, you make it there. So how do you get rid of this? You quietly default on the reserve status by letting gold go to the moon. All the gold that's been delivered here that no one has an answer for who the hell's doing it. Oh, it's just the banks. No, it's not the banks. They do cash settlement. They don't do that kind of delivery in number bars. But what if it was Bessent who said, you're going to do this, you're going to keep it quiet, we're not going to rattle the bushes, just leave it in your account, we'll take it as we need it. Or what about all the gold that has been accumulated by Tether that is now in bed with the US government and Trump's confidant is there managing USA Tether. And they buy all this gold. So in both cases, the USA is at an arm's length distance, the government, the Treasury Department. But they say to Tether, you guys will never be in trouble again. We're going to keep an eye on you, but you're going to buy gold with all of that accumulated interest that is not transferable to the holder of the stable coin that will devalue the dollar. And you'll quietly sell that to us, right, over time. But that's going to devalue the dollar better than anything because it is the only neutral asset by which anything can be measured. Not another currency measured against the dollar, measure that against any currency. And so by devaluing the dollar precipitously, not only can you reindustrialize, but you can actually sell the product to the world. You can give our children and grandchildren a future, a chance to actually be the engine of manufacturing again, not just IT. And you can have a reasonable shot at working down the debt by producing more than we consume in an environment where AI is here just in time to attack the labor market. I think that is what they want. I do believe that. Now, I might be wrong, but when you see all these deliveries and no one can explain it, and I'm the only one screaming about it, and people say, well, it's not leaving, so what? If you're the Exchange Stabilization Fund in the U.S. Treasury Department, do you give a crap if you leave it at COMEX in a BRICS vault and say, we'll take it slowly? We don't want to wake everyone up that it's actually us doing this. No one told me who took possession of 39 million ounces of silver, left COMEX in February. Who did it? Who has logistics capability to move 3 million pounds of silver in trucks worth $4 billion? Could it be Bessent? Why did a lot of it stay here? Could it be the Treasury leaving it on COMEX to throw everyone off, using Tether to accumulate massive amounts to throw everyone off? But why? Because higher gold devalues the dollar better than anything else. Ask President Roosevelt about that. And as that happens, manufacturing becomes a reality. Soft defaulting on the reserve status becomes a necessity, and giving our children a future becomes a possibility. All of these things, without it, we go back to what Richard said, inflate or die, because we produce less than we consume. That's the thesis. We'll see if I'm right. Either I'm stupid or have the courage stupidly to say it, but I am beginning to see other people pick up on it. Like, hey, something's not right here. Why does a crypto company continue to buy the crap out of the gold market? Interesting. And why is Bo Hines there? Interesting. And weren't they in trouble? Interesting. And did they open up their back door to the Justice Department? Oh, they sure did. So you put it all together, I don't know. You see, like, connecting the dots isn't hard. It's just having the courage to actually say it publicly when, you get ripped a lot. And I'm okay with that. I say this is my own thought, right? I'm not saying that this is for sure, but everything I say up to this point is all factual. Now, put the dots together, and could this be? Sure seems like Occam's razor to me.
Well, connecting the dots is not that simple. You've got to find the dots, and most people don't even see the dots on the same page as you do, Andy, and that's what makes your observations here unique. But if I'm understanding you correctly, and we have discussed this in the past, we have, and Luca Groban has pointed to something similar, so the dollar remains as the unit of account, a medium of exchange. Gold becomes that neutral reserve asset. And in order to maintain that the U.S. has the gold, you're saying Tether is part of a covert program to buy gold on behalf of the United States.
I'm saying it seems very plausible and logical to me because nothing else makes sense about it. And when you look at how Tether has integrated into the system with the Treasury and the Justice Department, and now Bo Hines is there, sure makes sense.
And what does that mean then for demands for treasuries?
It means that it's synthetically, it's now, at least the front end of it, is synthetically tied to the ground. If every time if I owe you $5,000 come next January, and I send it to you, a stablecoin is created and treasuries are bought attached to it. When I send it to you and you receive it, the stablecoin is burned and the interest on that treasury is kept by the issuer. They can't give it to you or I. So now they end up, what?
Talk them through the gold angle here. How does the U.S. having gold potentially create more demand for treasuries? Are we back to that idea?
It's not that gold creates more demand for treasuries. It's movement of money creates synthetic demand for treasuries. Anytime money is moved, it has to be backed by 90-day or less treasuries backing the stable coins. So it's synthetic. In other words, organic demand would be like, I want a short-term treasury. I feel safe there. Synthetic demand says, well, you know what? I'll tell you what, anytime you move a dollar anywhere, whether it's a gumball or a new car, it's going to be backed by U.S. treasuries. And so you're creating demand for treasuries in a synthetic manner. Now, that doesn't talk about the back end of the curve. It's just the front end. And that's why Judy Shelton's idea made such beautiful sense to me. And maybe it still happens.
Well, that's where I was going with this, is part of the gold secret accumulation plan potentially to still come out with that gold-linked U.S. long-term treasury. I mean, Judy Shelton said she expected it. It would be nice on the 250th anniversary of the United States. Would be nice. I don't know that President Trump making that announcement at 11 p.m. with the fireworks and everything would have made sense, but just because it didn't happen on that specific date doesn't mean that that's no longer part of the vision. Is that?
I mean, I think it's the best idea I've ever heard, hers. When I put my little idea behind it, I mean, I actually could see a pathway to hope, to our kids having the same opportunity that I did and my parents did and the generation before that. I mean, I think we're in trouble otherwise. I mean, I've yet to find anyone give me anything substantive on how we can dig our way out of this massive hole. And when you put into it the uneducated aspect of the populace, Dalio again says 60% of the country has a literacy rate under the 6th grade, with the indebtedness and the lack of savings, lack of education, just in time for AI to come and kill us kill the labor market when we already don't make anything because of Triffin's dilemma. It makes such great sense. Will it happen? I sure hope so. I think it would, when you throw into the mix that Van Eck Fund says, if the dollar really did lose reserve status, we could see, and this is their emerging market bond team, So we could see gold going to 139,000 an ounce. That's them saying this. Well, and people say, well, is gold going to be revalued? We've talked about how James Rickards says 24,000, and how Luke Groman, I think, is a smart. If I had one phone a friend guy on anything, it might be Luke Groman, smartest dude in the world. And
you're my phone a friend, Andy.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. You're too kind, but
Luke Groman,
he's a different level. And I heard him say, maybe even on your show once, that he could see it organically going to a point and then either being marked to market or revalued. But using Tether and any of the stablecoin issuers, Tether being the one that will do primary issuing, but you'll get all the banks and the insurance companies, and they'll all issue stablecoins, but they all have the same rules. They got to be backed by these treasuries. And if you get them to buy gold with the accumulated interest as part of a deal, whatever that deal is, well, you push gold to the moon. You don't have to revalue it synthetically. You can let the market do it, even though it is being synthetically revalued, but yet organically. Synthetically, in that treasuries are being purchased via the movement of money. That's synthetic, but taking that interest and buying gold with it is organic to a degree, synthetic also, but push gold to the moon. And by doing that, you're not doing it because you want gold buyers to get wealthy. You're doing it because you want to devalue the dollar, to reshore manufacturing, to pay down the debt. In a strong dollar, you can never, ever, ever have a trade surplus. You can build all the manufacturing you want. You have to sell it. It's the same reason why the Chinese were able to win a contract on rebuilding the Oakland Bay Bridge, shipping all the materials from China, because it was too expensive here. There, it's not. That's part of being the reserve status. Currencies just depreciate against yours. To buy dollars, to buy energy and commodities, you can't do it. I don't think the BRICS want to be the reserve currency. I don't think China wants to be. They just want to make it parallel, so they're not reliant on the US dollar. And that in and of itself, because of the way the system is set up, will be very detrimental on the United States. It's not that anyone wants to be the reserve, because they see what happens to your manufacturing capacity if you are. But how about alternatives? And that's what this is all about. The ramifications simply from a viable alternative that is mature and is cooperative is the death knell to the US system. It doesn't have to replace it, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon, but just augmentation of the status quo is enough to, in an over-leveraged, massively indebted system like this, is enough to turn over the apple cart.
Well, Andy, we are running out of time. There are some aspects that I would like to explore with you, but we're out of time for this episode. But in terms of the U.S. response here, very quickly, President Trump has opposed the BRICS economic bloc. He's threatened 100% tariffs on member nations. He's threatened additional 10% tariffs in any country aligning with their anti-American financial policies. Many would say that that's exactly the kind of rhetoric that is creating these alternatives. But what is the U.S. response to this? You're aware of this is happening. Obviously, the Trump administration is aware. I understand that you think that they're creating some kind of backup potentially with gold, but articulate that for us as a final thought, how you see the U.S. actually responding to this.
I think the better question is, how will the next administration respond to it? And this is why they've couched it as China's endeavor of internationalization of the yuan, not the BRICS. It is not, who knows? But a tariff is protecting domestic manufacturing. That's not a tariff, that's a sanction, and that's the exact same reason the world is doing this. And that would just point to, see, you guys, this is why, it's this crap. This is why we need to do this. It's at some point, it's the law of diminishing returns, right? If we had the greatest manufacturing base the world had ever seen, and they were trying to then do these kinds of things, fine. That's a tariff. But what are we actually protecting other than our hegemony? That's not a tariff, that's a sanction. And that's the stick, not the cooperative carrot. And that is what the world is pushing back against. And the West has done this for hundreds of years, countries in Europe before us. And I think now you have countries that are educated, motivated, sophisticated, coordinated, and whatever aided you can throw at it, plus wealthy. And they're like, you know what? It's our time. So slowly we build the infrastructure. slowly and without antagonizing, we build this entire swath of human population, of military might, of manufacturing, of ingenuity, of production of natural resources, and agreements not only across the globe, but those that make sense from strategic standpoint of travel on land and by sea. And we become something very legitimate over time, but play the long game. We'll just wait them out, and we'll do it in a way that we become incredibly legitimate over time. And, it's kind of like the bully that rules the schoolyard, and you get a bunch of kids that start working out every day for months and months and months and months and months. And one day they show up at school a few years later, and they're big and tough as hell. And they say, what you going to do about it? We don't want to fight, but what are you going to do about it? We have the right to play here too, is what they're basically saying. We'll do it our own way. And if you want to fight, we'll bring it on. But until then, shut up. And I think that's what ultimately would happen. We're not there yet. They're still working out, right, in the gym. But you can see they're getting bigger. They're getting more coordinated and more sophisticated. We'll see how it all plays out. But I think to dismiss it is the biggest mistake you can make overall and over time.
And of course, part of that fight literally is what we're seeing with United States and Iran. And we've discussed what the implications of that could be for the dollar and for gold. But we are out of time here, Andy. Very quickly, an investor is watching this saying, all right, what action do I take? And I know it's going to sound like you're talking your own.
No, I'm going to say it a different way. Look, Cantillon effect. The Cantillon effect, in essence, is a theory that says those closest to the money benefit disproportionately in an inflationary environment. Well, closest to the money means sophisticated enough and have enough in savings to buy assets, in my mind. It actually has a slightly different connotation, but close enough, and that is that those who have assets, whatever those assets are to you, win. Those who don't pay higher living expenses and lose. It's a K-shaped economy. It's bifurcating the economy, and you have winners and you have losers, and no one in the middle class in between. And that's what is happening. And the only way you win is to continue to pay your expenses in dollars, but do not save in dollars. Rick Rule talks about an 8% reduction in the purchasing power of the dollar every single year. Okay, well, that means in 10 years, you've lost 80% of your wealth. You own assets not to become wealthy, but because they are wealth. And so if that's gold and silver, great. If that's farmland, if that's crypto, whatever the hell it is, own assets. You win. Now, for me, especially after seeing what happened to Bitcoin, where cold wallet Bitcoin was hacked, I'm already scared. But I think that, might be Bitcoin for someone, might be for me, because even though I believe in the mission and the message of the communities, for me, it is precious metals, and it is, maybe farmland. But for whatever it is for you all, that's what matters. Buy assets, own assets, those that are liquid, and you win. As inflation continues to devalue the dollar over time, it's all but guaranteed. So that's what individual investors do. You save in dollars, you're going to go broke. You're not a contrarian, you're going to be a victim. That's the clearest answer I can give without talking my book, because I don't talk my book. After all of these years, Michelle, I don't need to talk my book anymore. I believe in it. I do. I believe in it in my soul, and I hope that comes across. That's the only thing I hope comes across.
Well, you've certainly given a lot of nuggets that have come across. We'll follow up on what we hear from this meeting. I have to let you go now, Andy, but always interesting chatting with you. Andy Schectman, thank you.
Bye, Michelle. Hope to see you in studio soon. Thanks for having me, and you stay well. We'll talk to you soon.
We'll see you soon, Andy. Thank you. And as always, a big thank you to all of you for watching. If you enjoy these conversations, please subscribe to the channel. Please do share our content. A reminder that full episodes are also posted on Apple and Spotify podcasts. Every subscription, every like, every share, every comment helps us reach more people, and I'm really very grateful for your support. So do leave us your comments, questions, topics, and guest suggestions. We love hearing from you. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay sovereign.
This is The Real Story with Michelle Makori.